and let's get this done. A small guy was bruised and bleeding. He came to the door and he answered the door. The man outside who knocked on the door said, could he speak to the head of the house? And the little guy said, well, that's just what my wife and I were discussing. The reason that story is relevant to what I'm going to preach about tonight is because I'm in the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. And we've taken a tact on this book of Revelation. And I'm looking at it as the story that was written by the Lamb, and we talked about that quite a bit recently. But tonight I want to call this the story of conflict and conquest. The story of conflict and conquest. You see, conflict and conquest is the history of humanity. We have been at war almost from the very beginning. There has never hardly been a time in the history of human life on earth that we haven't been in some kind of a fight or another. Now, just the minute that Adam and Eve had children and stepped outside of the Garden of Eden, the war began. Cain and Abel began to fight and to struggle with each other and conflict. And one of them wanted to be bigger than the other and better than the other. And so it was awful, and one of them killed the other. It was a bad start. I believe we're not created for conflict. I don't believe God made human beings to be in battle and in war. I think He made us to be peaceful and in loving each other. But we've opted for it and inaugurated the survival of the fittest as the standard operating procedure for man. I went online in researching this sermon, and I wanted to see how many people have been killed in battle that we have records of in the history of mankind. And as I looked on this, I want you to know that I've got, I think, 3 or 4 screens worth of, I'm still going through that, you can see it through my computer here, a listing of the wars that have just been listed in this article. But I want to briefly bring it down to this. I thought I'd read a few of them, but it would just, here's what it sounds like. The Taipei Rebellion in China, the Second Sino-Japanese War, 200 million, the Warring States era of China, 10 million, the conquest of Timor and Lame, 7 million, the Russian Civil War, 5 to 9 million, the conquest of Ethiopia, 5 million, the Second War, 3,800,000. You see what those are wars you never heard of. And that I'm not mentioning. And so I want to just summarize it by saying, then this article that I was reading said that nearly 1/4 of all human beings who have ever lived on planet Earth have been killed in war. 1/4 of humanity lost its life in battle. Now, obviously, that is difficult for us to even get our heads around. What is going on? And you need to be aware that because of the sin that has come into our lives through the Garden of Eden fall and our choice to be to want our own way and to conquest and be in conflict, we've caused great misery on earth. Now, some of you tonight are a result, or you're right now in a conflict, maybe in your own home. See, we've not, just because you've been in battle doesn't mean the conflict is ended. I mean, some of you are tonight in a family struggle, a community struggle, maybe, I don't know what. I mean, there's all conflict in every direction. Now, Isaiah begins to describe a conflict that began in heaven. And he chronicled it in Isaiah 14, where he said these words, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You've been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realms of the dead, to the depths of the pit." See this battle, this fight, this conflict that we're entering in, we've all been a part of it, one way or another. It's going to all come to a conclusion one day. God's going to judge it all. He's going to deal with it all and settle. I'm going to have His word, as the last word said, on conflict and conquest. And we're reading about it tonight in the 6th chapter of Revelation. In John chapter 16, verse 33, these words were written, or said by Jesus. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So, never before have we been able to understand that as clearly as we have this very night. When I just told you that 1/4 of the human population that's ever lived on planet Earth have died or because of conflict or war. Jesus said, "You will have in this world you will have trouble." So Jesus is saying to us that only in Him will we have peace. And it's not the kind of peace that this world gives, but it's spiritual peace. So some of the names that we're going to read about Jesus as we get further into the book of Revelation, one of His names is Prince of Peace. And when He comes at the end, when the conflagration of war is at climax, we're going to see the heavens open, and the Prince of Peace is going to come and bring His peace into the world. Now, you don't have to be a part of the conflict and conquest drama if you simply trust Jesus and let Him lead. But sadly, we seldom ever do that. So, background. Let me give you just a little background on where we are tonight, and so that maybe this chapter of Revelation, chapter 6, will make a lot more sense to you. In the Jewish culture, horses were not used for riding pleasure or even to work. They rode mules. They were oxen. They plowed with oxen, and beasts of burden were mules or donkeys. A horse in the ancient world was always a war weapon, a war horse. That's what they were used for. When Egypt, you remember, pulled the chariots, they pulled them with war horses. And so a horse, anytime you find that word embedded, especially in Revelation, you understand that we're not talking about a beast of burden. We're talking about war. So tonight we're going to begin talking about war by talking about horses. Chapter 6 begins, set the stage for the end of all war. It's going to come to a conclusion. And as I said, war has always been bad, but please understand, God has a better way. Now it seems that the idea of war was born in the heart of Lucifer. Lucifer, who was he? Well, we don't really know. He was the bearer of light. That is the translation of his name, is the one who bore light in heaven. And he raised himself up. And as I read in Isaiah, he said, I will be like God. I want to sit on the throne. I will lift myself up. He wanted to be that. So he brought war and the idea of war into the spiritual world. Now the snake in the Garden of Eden carried Lucifer's plan to earth and passed it on to Adam, who passed it on to us. See, war is just inbred within us. I've often wondered and asked myself, what would life on earth be like today had there never been a war? If there had never been one war, what would it be like? You know what I think? I think we would not have any health problems. I don't think we'd have environmental problems. We would probably be inhabiting all the planets in our solar system, if not further on than that. We would have an economy where everybody was blessed and there were no poor people. We would, as I said, we would have most of our problems solved. Imagine the money, the resources, the time that we've wasted and invested in war. And just imagine what that would be like had that never happened. If we pursued peace as a race, from this point forward, there's no telling where we would go from now on. Let me say it like this, and you've heard it said many times. War is hell. War is hell. And anybody who's ever been in it, ever been involved in it, completely will say the same thing. War is hell. But I want you to notice that heaven is not led by a war angel, but by the Prince of Peace. Keep that in mind. Now, we don't have to be in conflict if we can pursue the Lord and love God and love each other. And I'm going to say it like this. There is a better way for us to live. We don't have to live in conflict with each other. We don't have to live trying to get conquest over one another. There's a better way. So what are the results of war? Now I want to take that question because that's what I felt like Revelation chapter 6 was answering. I looked ahead and tried to read it, and I read it backwards, and I believe it's trying to tell us this is the consequence of war. This is what happens when war results. These are what you can get. This is what you should expect when war breaks out. So if you're ready, let's begin Revelation chapter 6, the first seal. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Then I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow. Now the bow was not for hunting, for pleasure, for recreation. The bow is the weapon of war, of choice, up until the invention of gunpowder. There have been more people killed with the archery. Archery in the ancient world was artillery. That's where they would stand back and shoot at you from 100 yards back. And so the rider on the horse here he's riding a horse of war, and he's also carrying a bow or artillery with him as he comes. And he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Now the Lamb started writing this story of war, and he's going to tell us about the horrible progression of war. So tonight we're going to watch what happens when war breaks out. One thing happens, then the second thing happens, and then another thing happens, and it sets in motion a domino effect that is just terribly destructive. Now before we get into this, I want to show you, I want to go back just briefly and bring you up to speed on the world capitals, the nations that have dominated the world over the years. And to do this, I want to use Daniel's description of the beast, or this great statue in the book of Daniel to do it. Now, the first great empire that this world ever knew was the Babylonian Empire. That empire was in Iraq. And it was probably one of the greatest ever. And it was because in fact, it may be the greatest empire that's ever been on planet Earth. The next one that followed it was the Medo-Persians. These are the Iranians. The Persians, they're from Iran. The Iraqis and the Iranian, both of those took their turns at having the 2 greatest civilizations on Earth. The next we find was initiated and brought to bear by Alexander the Great. And he was that Greek, who conquered the world. He pulled all the known world under his empire. He took the Babylonian Empire, he took the Iranian Empire, and all of Europe and everywhere, and Alexander the Greek brought it all together under the Greeks. Now, the Romans then came last of all. And the Romans came, and now when Alexander died, his 4 generals divided up the world among themselves. And so the Romans then came and they built on the work that the Greeks had done. But the Roman Empire was the last great empire of the world. Now, you and I are a result of the Roman Empire. We're still part of that Roman Empire. Because as it broke up, England, of course, was part of it, and now we're part of it. So we're considered, as the Bible looks at this, as part of that great Roman Empire, or what's left of it. Now, the final war that's going to come on planet Earth, and we're beginning to see it already, the fuse is already lit on the final war. And it's going to be a war between the Muslim nations and the other nations, everybody else. It's going to be a religious war, and you can see it coming. Now, anybody with any common sense at all can watch the news and watch what's happening in this whole world is going to be between the Muslims and all the other world religions. So when this white horse comes, the rider has a bow, he's given a crown, and he rode out to control the world. And I'm not going to tell you who I think it is yet. It'll take a couple of weeks, maybe 3, before we talk about who this white horse rider was. Now, the war is about killing the enemy. And so the second seal that we're going to pick up now, we're going to see this is a red horse. Okay, first horse out is red, white. The second one is red. Now, the second seal is opened, and blood will be shed. Now, peace is always the price we pay for war. Peace is gone when war breaks out. So let's keep reading then. We jump down to verse 3. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. But to him was given a large sword. So the bloodletting, the killing horse that came out is going to come, and he's going to let people kill each other in horrible numbers. So war begins when somebody wants to conquer and take conquest. The white horse, he came out to conquer and to conquest. Then the next thing that happens is peace is removed from the place, and war and death and blood comes out. That's the second thing that happens. Now the third, let's see what happens when the third seal or the third horse rides out. So in this third one, we're talking about the unbalancing of the economies of the world and the food supply. That's the third thing that happens. Conquest, war, and then famine, or the lack of food, and the breaking up of the economy. Let's read verse 5. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, get this is important, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. Now that's very important, and I'm going to try to explain what that means to you tonight. So when war breaks out, John sees this black horse, and this individual that's riding him has a scale in his hand. He comes out with a scale. The first one came out with a crown and a bow. The second one came out with a sword. The third rider, the black horse, comes out with a scale. He's going to balance things. Something's going to balance or come out of balance. He's going to deal with balancing. And John sees him, and food is weighted out for money. In this, as he talks about this too, he's talking about the food in the world, what it takes to feed our planet. And so war is going to disrupt the food supply for the entire planet, and famine will break out. Now this is a picture of rationing of the world's food supply. So when this black horse comes out in this final wars, the world's food supply is going to get in great demand. Now what is being described here when it talks about 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages? This is just barely enough to feed a worker, a man who's working. In other words, the salary that people are going to make will be just enough to keep them and maybe their family alive. Just barely enough. So in other words, it talks about a rationing. The food is going to be very, very expensive. It's what it's going to take for us to feed our families. Now the good news is, those of us who live in rural settings, in farm background countries, we're going to be better off. But imagine already in nations like Bangladesh and Sumatra and some of the African countries that are just today standing on the very knife edge of famine. They're just barely able to feed their population now. And many of them are starving to death. Imagine what happens when the entire world's food supply is disrupted. So we're going to see a huge picture of famine. Now it's going to cost a full day's wage in this time just to get enough food to survive. Food will become expensive, as I said. But then notice it says, but don't harm the oil and the wine. Now what are those? Those are luxuries. Those are luxuries. And what this means is that the rich people are still going to have their oil and wine. But the poorer nations, they're going to be starving to death. But there will be, so for those who have the resources, there will be food enough. Even for luxuries. Of some of those nations, like some that I've mentioned in Africa, they're simply going to starve to death. It's simply sad. Now the fourth seal, we pick up in verse 7. The fourth seal, death is the result of war. And when the Lamb, verse 7, when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Now, I did some background work, and this pale that we use in the English language is better described as a sickly green horse. Okay, he's sickly green. All right, so you get these horses: white, red, black, and then sickly green. So let's see what that does. Verse 8, I looked, and there before me was this pale horse. Its rider was named Death. And Hades, that's not hell, but that's the grave. Hades is the grave. And death and the grave was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by the sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. My friends, this horse, when he comes out, may very well be describing the final battle where 1/4 of the world's population is killed. But did you hear me say earlier that already 1/4 of the world's population has been killed? So it's a judgment on what's happened, but it's also a prophetic look into the future. So don't get mixed up and lost in this. The book of Revelation sometimes is looking back as well as just looking forward. And so we're going to see that already 1/4 of humanity has been killed by this war, blood, black horse and all. But now the future is also forecast that way. Now, so we see what war that begins in conflict and conquest runs on blood and results in death. And this is God's word on war. God is just warning us. He's had this book, this chapter 6 in the book of Revelation for 2,000 years now, to warn us this is what happens when nations fight against nation. You set in motion all these horrible things. War has always been a part of life, but there's a worse one coming. Now let's go to the 5th seal. If you're here tonight for the first time, and I saw many hands, we're studying the book of Revelation. We don't preach in these dark tones all the time. This is just because we decided to study the book of Revelation together as a congregation. So don't give up on us and think this is all we ever talk about is bloom and death and all that. We've got a lot of good things to say from God. But as we look at the book of Revelation, we want to try to get a picture of what really is going on in the future. So let's read, as we keep reading here in verse 9. So the 5th seal, the casualty, justice. Justice is a casualty of war. Now the seals that happen now, they're not led by horses, but they're the result of the war that started by the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, and the pale green horse. Now, after that comes some more seals or some more chapters in the story or some more insight, however you want to look at this. So let's keep reading verse 9. When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, will you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" So what we see here is that there is a whole 1/4 of the human population who've been killed, and they're crying out to God, "God, when will there be justice? Are you going to just let this go on forever? Will you ever say anything about this? Lord, when are you going to fix this horrible thing we've got going here?" Let's keep going. Verse 11. Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer, until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been. So what happens here in heaven when justice is when they cry out for justice? Lord, why are you doing this? When are you going to put a stop to it? The Lord comes and He brings them their white robe. Now get this now. The white robe is a symbol of their inhabitants, of their presence in heaven. He says, "You guys are here. You're in the place of peace now." And so even though the justice may wait a little longer, take solace in the fact that you're home. Never again will you suffer. Never again will you have to be killed or watch your family die of starvation. Never again, because you are home where peace rules and reigns. That's what is being said here. So in heaven, justice will be restored. I want you to hear that. Please listen. When we get to heaven, one of the things that's going to be restored is justice. I know right now on earth there isn't justice. Why is it fair that our East Coast got hit by a hurricane last weekend and billions of dollars of damage and lives lost? Well, is that fair? Is it fair that the Katrina hit down there, in New Orleans? Is that fair? Is it fair that tornadoes tore up Joplin and killed over? Is that fair? No, it's not fair. But on earth, everything is not fair here. But in heaven, justice will reign. The scales of justice will be balanced in heaven. So John says, hang on just a little while longer. This thing's going to work out. The 6th seal speaks of a great shaking of everything. Everything is going to get shaken. Now there is a great theology in the Bible about shaking. How that God shakes us. He tries to shake us loose from holding on to our own self-worth, our own protection, our own talent, our own intellect. He tries to shake us loose from all that so that we'll trust Him. But war is a great shaking. It shakes up everything. Let's keep reading here. I watched as He opened the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red, and the stars in the sky fell to the earth as figs drop from a fig tree when shaken by a strong wind. The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. I feel like, now please, this is me, I feel like this is talking about weapons of mass destruction. I think we're talking about here about atomic bombs, about weapons that destroy and disrupt the entire planet. I think that's what we're talking about here. Somebody has said that this is weapons of mass destruction, but I want you to notice that when a nuclear bomb is detonated, the ground shakes like an earthquake. I want you to see that the sky is darkened by the debris that's blown up into the sky in the upper atmosphere. And the dust in the upper atmosphere makes the moon appear red. The whole moon appears red because of the dust it's shining through it. I think we're seeing here what John is describing as nuclear proliferation and the setting off or detonating of nuclear weapons in the final war that will be coming. Trees dropping their fruit because of blast pressure. Mountains and islands topographically moved because of great explosions. I think what John is describing right here is the use of thermonuclear devices on our planet. And we all know that that's the dream of many terrorists today, to slip a nuclear bomb into one of our cities and to set it off in a populated area. You know what happened to our economy when two planes flew into Twin Towers? Imagine losing Los Angeles, or imagine losing New York or Houston. It would totally disrupt the economy of our planet. Probably would never recover. And so all of these things are fitting together as we look at the results of war. So what do you need to know? Here's what you need to know. War is hell. That's not God's plan. What we've started now is out of control. And we are deeply afraid. Most of the world is afraid tonight of the wars that are coming. Read verse 15. Verse 15. Then the kings of the earth, the princes, the generals, the rich, the mighty, and everyone else, both slave and free, hid in caves and among the rocks and the mountains. See, people are scared. I mean, we're hearing all kinds about people are buying these bunkers and they're hoarding food and stocking it up. You know, it's a scary time. See, we have a sense that our wars have made God mad at us. I think our whole planet feels that God is disappointed with us, discouraged with us because we've killed so many of our brothers and sisters, and we've had this horrible thing of war that's always been a cloud over us, and I think we fear it. And so they are calling out to the mountains. Let's keep reading. Verse 16. They call to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of Him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. See, we're afraid, not of each other, but we're afraid that God's going to be mad at us for what we've done to planet Earth. We've killed each other. We've destroyed our environment. We've messed with just about everything. You know, and we're afraid that God is going to let this all happen. And let's keep reading. Fall on us, hide us from the face of Him who sits on the throne. Verse 17. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can withstand it? Friends, I don't want to scare you tonight. I want to give you great hope and great peace. And the great hope is, if you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, as we're going to talk about Sunday morning, those that the Lamb is going to shelter, the Lamb is going to take care of His own. He's going to take care of His own. And no matter where you are, what happens, you will be protected, you will be cared for, and you will be blessed because the Lord will care for us. Just make sure that Jesus is your Lord. And accept the peace treaty Jesus made between heaven and earth. See, let me boil it down like this. When God made the planet and put us here, we rebelled. We turned our back on Him. We said, no, we're going to do it our way. We're going to take care of our own environment. We're going to take care of everything. You just don't worry about us, God. We're going to eat the apple. We're going to do it our own way. And we turned our back on God. And now all the time since then, we're afraid God's mad at us. We've been so afraid. Oh, God's mad at us because we turned our back on Him. And Jesus came more than anything else to tell us that God is no longer angry with us. The cross settled it all. The cross is the great peacemaker between heaven and earth. Jesus on the cross was rejected by earth and rejected by heaven. He was rejected by both so that we could be made whole, so that we might have peace. In this world, there will not be peace except the kind of peace Jesus gives. Folks, run to Him. He's the rock you need to run to. He's the one. And let's watch for what He does for His children. Accept the peace treaty Jesus made between heaven and earth, between God and you. Accept it, and you won't have to worry about all this other stuff that will come as a result of war. That's the key. Let's pray.